Hi, everyone, and welcome to my video on how to fill out the buyer broker service agreement in the state of Oklahoma. My name is Brad Anderson. I'm the broker owner of White Rock Realty, and we have offices in Texas, in Oklahoma, and New Mexico. And if you are not a White Rock Realty agent, maybe you should be. If you want to know more about us, you can go to this website right here at www.whiterocktexas.info, find out more about us, our compensation plan, etc. And I also have this handy dandy cheat sheet for realtors in Oklahoma. And this is a list of what documents you'll need for a listing transaction, a buyer transaction, and a lease. So if you want this, I am more than happy to give it to you. Just either text me at this number, email me, and I will send that right out to you. Okay. So education is at the center of everything that we do at White Rock Realty. The more you know, the more confident you're going to be, and that is going to lead to more closings. So today I am going to help you fill out the buyer broker service agreement. This is the latest and greatest as a result of the NAR settlement. So we'll go through a couple of things from that, but let's just kind of jump into it. So paragraph 1 really hasn't changed a whole lot. It just outlines what the purpose of the brokerage relationship is. Okay. And paragraph 2 is a result of the NAR settlement. And it clearly says the broker and buyer, and so remember, whenever it says broker, they mean you as an agent, both acknowledge that a written agreement must be signed and entered into before a broker can show properties to a buyer. Okay, so that is a new change. If your buyers push back, just explain to them that this is a new rule we have to follow. We cannot show a home without getting a document signed. Now, they may have apprehension about that. We're going to go into a paragraph or two that will hopefully put them at ease. Right. Next is buyer representation. So it just says buyer has not signed a written brokerage agreement currently in force with another broker. And then number 4, a buyer affidavit. Buyer acknowledges that Oklahoma law requires the buyer to sign an affidavit before closing on a property, attesting that the buyer is either U.S. citizen, Native American, or non-citizen alien who is or shall become a bona fide resident of Oklahoma in compliance with 60 OS 121. All right. And then it goes on to review the duration of the agreement. It pretty much says, hey, if this is left blank, it's a default of 60 days. Based on the market and where you are, it's going to take at least 30 days to close and 30 days to probably find something. So you are well served to put in 90 days or greater. Now, here is where hopefully the requirement to sign this document will be a little bit easier to understand. Termination of agreement. This agreement may be canceled by either party by providing at least 3 business days notice in writing. Okay, although it says unless the buyer is under contract to purchase property. So buyer can't hire you, get under contract, and then say, hey, sorry, it's not working out. And that is a real possibility in this world of buyer is on the hook to pay you your commission. Okay. It says buyer's termination of the agreement does not relieve buyer of the obligation to compensate broker for purchase agreements executed within however many days after the termination. If that property is acquired, that is being acquired, was presented to the buyer through brokerage services of the broker. So what does that mean? It means that if you terminate this agreement and you put in here, let's say 10 days, well, that means from the date of termination through the 10th day after, if this buyer enters into a contract and closes on a property that you showed them during your agreement, you are technically entitled to the compensation. Okay, so let's go into the real meat of why this document exists. So that's a good point, actually. This document is nothing more than a written agreement between you and your client. Okay, not the seller. It's just you / the brokerage and your client. Compensation of broker. Buyer acknowledges. So as I said before, anything in bold or underlined in these contracts is important. Buyer acknowledges the compensation in this agreement is fully negotiable and not set by law. The compensation section of this agreement must be completed before it can be signed by the buyer. This agreement is not enforceable if any of this is left blank. So there's basically three choices. The compensation for buyer's broker shall be A, buyer shall pay the broker at closing an amount equal to either a flat fee or a percentage of the final gross selling or lease price, right? So this document can be applied to a renter if you represent a renter. Buyer shall receive a credit towards the payment of the compensation in an amount equal to any payment made to the broker by any other broker or the seller. So if you put in 3% of the sales price and the seller then agrees to pay you as the agent 3%, well, the buyer is absolved. All right, that is going to be given a credit to the buyer. Okay. So not to put too fine a point on it, but this implies that a couple of things. The commission is going to be sought after by the seller or the other broker. So if the listing broker says, yeah, the seller / me as a listing agent agrees to pay you 3%, and that's, let's just say that's half of what they got from the seller, well, that's the broker. But then it says seller. So the seller is free to pay the other broker separately. Okay, so the listing agreement might be entered into with a listing agent that says, hey, I agree to pay you, let's just say it's 3% to list my home, but let me worry about paying the other buyer's agent. Okay, and that's kind of what this language means. All right, then secondly, 7B, buyer shall pay broker a retainer fee of X amount of money due and payable upon execution of this agreement. Okay, so let's just stop there for a second. Why would that ever happen? Well, let's say that the agent knows that they're going to go out of their way to show a bunch of houses. Let's just say the buyer is coming in from another state and the agent is going to have to put forth a lot of effort and expense up front because of various circumstances the buyer might be in. And they know from the get-go that they're going to be out of money, and there is no guarantee that the buyer is going to find anything and that they're going to close on it. Okay, so the buyer's agent might say, hey, I'll go do all this for you, but you're going to pay me $1,000 up front. But oh, by the way, it goes on to say, which shall be applied towards the compensation upon closing on a transaction in which the buyer acquires property. In all other circumstances, the payment shall be considered as a non-refundable retainer fee earned by the broker. Okay, so you could actually check 7A and B. This is just non-refundable and you get it up front. All right, or some other agreement. All right, and then it goes on to say, unless otherwise specified above, the compensation is due and payable upon closing. The compensation shall apply to any purchase agreements executed during the term of the agreement or any extension of this agreement. The compensation also applies to purchase agreements executed within X days after the expiration or termination of the agreement if the property acquired was done so as a result of the broker showing them a home. Okay, just like before. Okay, then it goes on to say, well, what if we don't close? Well, it says if seller fails to close with no fault on the part of the buyer, so if the listing portion of this defaults, the compensation shall be waived. If the transaction does not close due to a breach of contract of sale by the buyer, the compensation shall not be waived and shall become immediately due and payable. Okay, so if the contract is breached, so if the buyer all of a sudden changes their mind and there's no way to get out of the contract and it ends up not closing, the buyer is in breach of the contract. It does not relieve them of their obligation to pay you. Okay, then it goes on to say, and this is a key point, compensation to broker by the seller. So this implies the seller is going to pay the buying agent. The listing broker or seller is not required to make an offer of compensation to buyer's broker. Okay, that's a result of the NAR settlement. But it says 9A, sellers, if the seller's offer is equal to the compensation that we put here, the buyer shall not be obligated to separately pay the compensation listed in paragraph 7. So if the seller's paying it, you as the agent aren't double dipping. All right, they're either getting it from their own pocket or the seller. Option B, if the seller's offer is greater than what you put here, when would that happen? Well, if maybe you were dealing with a builder and they were giving you a bonus, all right? So compensation to buyer's broker must not exceed the compensation agreement are agreed to between the broker and the buyer in paragraph 7. Right? This is a result of the NAR settlement. All right? So you can't take more than what's in writing. If seller's offer is greater than what you put in paragraph 7, buyer shall not be obligated to separately pay the compensation listed in paragraph 7. The amount of compensation offered by listing broker or seller that is greater than the compensation listed in paragraph 7. So the difference, okay, may be addressed by further written agreement and may include one of the following. You can either credit it back to the buyer, credit it back to the seller, or another option negotiated and agreed to in writing by the parties. So the most common example of this would be if you took your buyer to a builder and the builder was giving you 3% plus a 5%, $5,000 bonus, and you and the buyer agreed to 3%. All right. Well, the builder's giving you 3%, but they're also giving you a $5,000 bonus. Well, you have to amend the very agreement that we're reviewing, that whereby the buyer allows you to take that extra compensation. Okay. Now, what if the seller's offer is less than what you put in paragraph 7? Well, the buyer shall pay the remaining balance of whatever you put in paragraph 7, unless otherwise agreed to in writing by the parties. That's a fancy way of saying you can amend this agreement if the buyer has no means to pay you the difference. So as an example, you put 3% here, and maybe because of the offer or whatever, the listing agent is only going to pay you 2%. Well, who's going to come up with that 1%? Well, they'll technically the buyer. But if they can't, and through a series of conversations, you both agree, okay, well, let's just amend this to say 2%, and you're off the hook, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, from paying me the difference. Okay? All right. And then it goes on to say cost of services or products obtained from outside sources Broker will not obtain or order products or services from outside sources, is an example, surveys, soil tests, title reports, inspections, without the prior consent of the buyer unless provided by the contract to sale, lease option, or exchange of real estate. So unless it's in the contract, agent is not going to do anything on behalf of the buyer unless it's okay. And those are common things like surveys, title reports, so on. Other buyers, buyer understands that other buyers may consider or make offers or purchase through broker for the same property. All right. Within the same company, the broker and their associated licensees often provide brokerage services to more than one buyer at the same time. And there's a chance that those buyers might want the house that this person's looking at. Okay. And all this has not changed. Okay. And then if you want to add anything extra, feel free to do that. You are not practicing law here. This is just an agreement between the brokerage and the client. And then you need to fill all this out specifically. All right. And completely. All right. And then it attaches the disclosure to buyer of brokerage duties, responsibilities, and services. So this is just a disclosure to the buyer about what brokerage services mean and what the buyer's rights are. And as always, however many buyers are in this transaction will sign it. Okay, so that is how you fill out the buyer broker service agreement. If you have any questions, as always, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope you found this video helpful.